Two things about Billy Cunningham. First, the only man in 76ers franchise history to win an NBA title for the team as both a player and its coach. The other, he's now 80 years old. That makes for a ton of stories, like being Charles Barkley's first pro coach.
Charles didn't like to run back on defense. Matter of fact, walking would have been a move. So there were times when he would have to run a little bit more than others.
A Sixers Hall of Famer like no other. Billy Cunningham is with us on Fresh 24.
The Sixers lock all windows and doors. For the record! Yeah! Redding, can he get it off? And the putback turning garbage into gold.
Billy Cunningham, do you watch the game today? And if so, what are your thoughts on it?
Mark, I watched it a little bit, just not as much as maybe 10 years ago. It's a different game than what I coached or played in. But, the bottom line is entertainment, and it appears that the fans enjoy it, and that's the bottom line. We just see the revenue that's being generated for owners as well as the players making in excess of $40 million a year. God bless them. And if the people keep enjoying it, just keep rolling it out.
What about the three-point shot? I know when you played in the ABA, that's the league that introduced it. We'll talk about the old American Basketball Association. And when you coached, it was hardly used. It was one of those things where if a guy threw up a prayer and it went in, all right, you got 3 points and that was it. Now it's a big part of the game. Is it too big? Is it too much of that?
I think at times when you see some players that shoot in the teens firing a 3-point shot, that's a little too much. I think when you have a Stephen Curry or a Thompson, understandable. I mean, they're exceptional shooters, and they've truly mastered their craft. Stephen Curry just really has revolutionized the game and the attitude towards it. Analytics have stepped into the picture. I hate to tell people, but we did a lot of things way back when. We didn't have the word analytics connected to it, but we kept track of every type of shot, rebound, turnover, how you ran your plays. All these things were accounted for, but now people are making a lot of money just installing that word analytics. The game has changed. I'll give you an example. I hate to say I was at a funeral yesterday, and I ran into a couple people that were involved with the Miami Heat, which I was involved with starting, and a partner. And at the time, besides the actual basketball players and coaches and trainers, we had a total of 36 people employed. Today, the Miami Heat have in excess of 300. So it is expanded. There's so many other ventures besides the actual game of basketball and people attending, and it just tells you how different things have changed.
How about this? Wilt Chamberlain, who is 7'1", you played with him, and we'll talk about him. But there's a young fella, Victor Wembanyama, from France. He's 19. He's an inch taller than Wilt. He plays all over the floor. Did you ever think you would see a player Wilt's size do what this young fella's doing right now?
Not really. I always thought that pivot play, the inside play, would be an important factor to the game of basketball, and I still do. When we see teams down 2 or down 1 in the latter part of the game, it's a rare occasion, I think, when you see them shooting a 3-point shot. And I didn't realize you had the ability to change your voice, but so be it. And
That's another country heard from, but go ahead.
I understand that completely. But I think that's something that has been lost and changed in the game. And I hope it comes back because I think that just shows another part of the game that makes basketball a great sport. I think it's wonderful seeing people shoot 3-point shots and dunking the basketball. But I think also to see somebody in the low post being able to either find a shot for themselves or create a shot for somebody else. And as great as Embiid is, I think that's something that's lost in his game. He's a great jump shooter. He can score for himself, but I think he's so gifted that he has the ability to make his teammates better, and that's one way I think he would be able to do that.
You were a great player, of course, out of Brooklyn, New York. You went to the University of North Carolina, recruited by Frank McGuire, a guy who later went to the pros and coached the Philadelphia Warriors. And he, even though he recruited you, left, and in came a guy to coach that team named Dean Smith. What was it like to play for Dean, his first year as a college coach?
Yeah, Dean was 33 years old, I think, at the
Hmm.
time when he stepped in for that position. I wasn't sure. Really, when I first got here, all I knew was Frank McGuire was the man. And here comes this guy, Dean Smith, math major at the University of Kansas, um, played on championship team in Kansas. And, I wish I had the opportunity to spend a few minutes with Frank McGuire and ask him why he even hired Dean Smith as an assistant coach. Dean was an assistant out at the Air Force Academy, and somehow you would have thought Frank McGuire would have found somebody out of New York City, which he was an area where he did a great job recruiting. But no, he found this man that went on to become one of the finest, if not the finest, coaches in basketball.
So you're drafted in the first round by the 76ers, and as a rookie, you're on a pretty good team. Wilt Chamberlain, Hal Greer, Chet Walker, all Hall of Famers. What kind of dues did you have to pay then as a rookie?
Um, and coming in, they had just lost the previous year to the Boston Celtics, and on that famous call, Havlicek stole the ball, and they came that close. So stepping into a situation where um, actually the 76ers never saw me play in college. That tells you something about and what happened was the owners of the Sixers, where Frank McGuire initially had coached, and went back to South Carolina because the team was sold. The Warriors were sold to a group out in San Francisco, and he had a son who demanded a lot of services, and that's why he went back to South Carolina and not to the West Coast. So they were familiar with Frank, and they called him and said, "Have you seen anybody that's intriguing to you in the college level?" And that's where they found me through Frank McGuire, and here I am. And you hear so many stories like that. With Red Auerbach finding Sam Jones, he called Jack McKinney. You see anybody interesting? There wasn't the travel, there wasn't the money, there wasn't the recruiting, and so many players were found in a similar manner, calling a dear friend who happened to have seen somebody play. And stepping into the role, though, I was drafted as a guard. And during the barnstorming period of time of training camp, we went to North Carolina State and played a game where I was originally from that area and going to school. And Casey Jones got me to the forward position within, I'd say, 4 minutes. He stole the ball from me, I guess, around 4 or 5 times. And people realized, no, 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 this isn't going to work. We better move him to another area of the court. And that was the start of my career as a forward in the NBA. Thank you, Casey. God bless you.
You played with the late great Wilt Chamberlain, and there are a lot of young folks out there who I've heard of Wilt, but really don't understand what his presence in the NBA meant historically. And quite frankly, without quoting all the stats, I just invite them to go and take a look at some of the numbers. Incredible. In fact, they changed the game to legislate against Wilt. That's how dominant he was. And I remember you told me, I want to say 15, 20 years ago, in an interview that you thought Wilt would still dominate today. Now, that was the early 2000s. How do you think he'd fare in today's league?
I think greatness would be great any period of time. Wilt would adjust. Who knows? Wilt Chamberlain might be shooting 3-point shots today, the way the game is played. God forbid. But
Yeah,
um,
right.
there's the statistic book on the NBA, and then there's Wilt's book. So often watching ESPN, and a player scores 50 points or more, and they'll make a reference. That's the second time, but Chamberlain did that 20 times in 1 year. So it was a different game, but still, you just staggering numbers. The one that always has jumped out at me more than anything is that the year Wilt averaged over 50 points a game. The average, the game is 48 minutes long. Wilt Chamberlain averaged more than 48 minutes a game. And if I'm not mistaken, the whole season he missed a total of 5 minutes. And the reason he missed 5 minutes of the game is he got thrown out. And that was the only, and just thinking, today you see players, I need a day off. And you have to understand, this is man, as you mentioned, 7'1" or maybe a little bigger, flying coach, and playing. And we would play. I went back and looked at the year we won a championship in 66, 67, and how many games we played, consecutive games. And there was one stretch we played 5 straight days. And we went from, I think it was from Philly to Pittsburgh to Miami. You have to remember, in those days, we played home games wherever they thought they could get a few thousand people. So we played home games in Syracuse, Pittsburgh, and Miami. So we went from right down the coast and then out to the West Coast, 5 straight games. And if I'm not mistaken, I think, and Will played every game, every minute.
And you're flying commercial, by the
Oh,
way. Can
sure,
I
we're
add
flying
that?
coach. We're
Yeah.
flying coach,
Mm-hmm.
not first class
Mm-hmm.
either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that was, we thought we were fortunate. My goodness, here we are doing something we loved, and we were getting paid. Not very well, but we were getting paid.
Yeah.
I remember one story. It was in 66, 67 year that Chamberlain broke the assist record for a center. And the headlines of Sports Illustrated was, the reason for this is Chamberlain can't score anymore. The next 5 games, he averaged over 60. And then went back to, with his assists. Just letting everybody know, I still can do this. And he was just a phenomenal athlete. If you look over some of the other things that he did, from high jumping to pole vaulting to holding track records in high school in Philadelphia for 20, 30 years, there's no telling what he would have been able to do. If he played for the Boston Celtics and replaced Bill Russell, who was a phenomenal player himself, and had Red Auerbach overlooking him, and had so many Hall of Famers play with him, I wonder how many championships he would have won during that period of time.
You once told a story about Wilt, the team. I think this was your rookie year. You had training camp in Longport at the beach in South Jersey, of all places, and he took a fancy to you. Let's listen.
Training camp, Longport was the motel we stayed at. I just remember the beds were all damp from the ocean. It was terrible. I'm standing on the balcony and I see this purple Bentley pull up. This man getting out of this car, and I'm going, oh my goodness, that's Wilt Chamberlain. And you're in awe. Everybody knew who Wilt Chamberlain was. He kind of took me under his wing, I would say, as a rookie. I remember when he was going to go fight Muhammad Ali in the Astrodome. He played in the Harlem Globetrotters in the off-season, traveling the world. You know, in halftime, Wilt would literally drink a thing of orange juice like this and eat an apple pie at halftime. And go out and play the other 24 minutes or whatever was necessary on the court. You know, there's so much talk about the greatest players. I think that two players that are being forgotten are Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell. If it wasn't for Chamberlain and Russell, I don't know if the NBA would have sustained itself. That's what people tuned in to see. Surely a wonderful story to be told.
Coach, in that you describe you driving him, what, to and from New York? Is that it? Why did he draft you to do that?
Well, he had this purple Bentley, or was it a Rolls? And it's the only car I've ever been in where I couldn't, if I put the seat all the way back, I couldn't touch the pedals. And I'm 6'7". And we'd get in the car. Philadelphia was not a hotbed. At that time, I was a single man, and I'd go up to see my family in Brooklyn. And Wilt would go up to, he had an apartment in New York City, and he had a nightclub in Harlem. And what was the name of it? Wilt's Paradise, or I'll remember as we talk here.
Okay.
Small's Paradise was the name of it.
Got it.
And it was the place in Harlem. If you were an entertainment or a musician, you used to end your night up at Small's Paradise. And I remember going there with Wilt. And then Wilt would drop me off in Brooklyn in front of my house, and people would go, "Who's that man?" You know, and see this 7'1" man step out of the car, and then he would pick me up. He would sleep in the back seat, and I would drive us down. And I got stopped one time for speeding, and I remember I said, "I'm sorry, sir," and Wilt stuck his head up, and thank goodness he was there. We didn't get a ticket.
In 1967, and that team was one of the greatest ever, 68-13, you ended Boston's run of 8 straight titles. What a moment, too. I'm thinking back to that Game 5. I was a kid in Philly just listening on the radio, hearing Wally Jones go crazy in the fourth quarter. What was the city like? And, of course, you went on, you beat the then San Francisco Warriors for the title, but that Boston game, that moment for Philadelphians, what can you recall about the building and the mood of the city after that?
Well, a couple things I remember. I remember Wally Jones just had one of those nights where he just couldn't miss a thing. And yeah, I think we beat them by over 20 points in that game. But the thing that amazed me, it was approximately 5 seconds, 6 seconds left in the game. And Luke Jackson was going down to make a layup to close out the game. And there was Bill Russell running him down, trying to block the shot. It was almost like this score can't be possible. And the other thing I remember is that after the game, obviously the excitement beating the Celtics, especially after 2 years previous losing to them. And the champagne came out, and all of a sudden, Wilt said, "We still have one left." And it was like all of a sudden there was dead silence. And everyone just, oh, okay, just settled down, and we just went about our business getting ready for the Warriors.
The thing that cracks me up in that 67 highlights film that they made for the team, they show you coming into the game. You were, of course, well known as a sixth man then. You're kind of like fixing your hair as you come into the game. I don't know. Did you do that regularly?
I have no idea. I doubt I did. Well, right now I couldn't do it at all. I don't have anything. I'm like you, Mark. It's easier getting out of the shower, though. You don't have to worry about putting
That's the
your
truth.
few strands of hair one way or the other.
So just to educate the young people, from 1968 to 76 was a league called the American Basketball Association. It played alongside the NBA, and they got their share of great players, including you. You went to play there for a couple of seasons. What do you remember most about a league that was actually commemorated beautifully by Terry Pluto in his book Loose Balls? But it was crazy. They experimented with something called a 3-point line. They had a red, white, and blue ball.
Yeah.
What else do you remember?
I remember many cases players, as soon as they got their check, ran to the bank to make sure they got their money first. But it was something I enjoyed thoroughly. It was travel was very difficult. We were going to a lot of small cities. Uh, the thing was, there were so many great players in the league. You had Julius Erving and George Gervin, and Rick Barry was playing in it. Yeah, and what they were doing, the ABA, is they would go in and they were getting players while they still participating in college basketball. So they were beating the NBA, who was waiting for you to finish 4 years of school, and then they would draft you. So they were a step ahead of the NBA, and and you just look at the impact it had, like we were mentioning before, the 3-point shot. Um, I played with the 3-point shot. It wasn't even used very much in the ABA. It was a shot that was used usually at the end of a period or at the end of a game when you were down several points and you needed more than just one basket to get back in the game. So, uh,
Hmm.
and it was fiercely competitive. A lot of fights. I remember that, but thank goodness I didn't have to participate in any. But well, George McGinnis, who ended up coming to Philadelphia at one point, he was a star with the Indiana Pacers. So um, the beauty of it is that both leagues came together, and bringing a player like Julius Erving into the NBA, especially in the late '70s, Julius basically carried the league. It was the only guaranteed
Hmm.
sellout in the different cities was when Dr. J showed up.
Hmm. And of course, you would later coach Doc, and we'll talk about that. But December 5th, 1975, and I mentioned that date because you came back, you finished your career with the Sixers, and on that date, your career suddenly ended, and there is a famous photo of you on the floor in agony, grabbing your knee, obviously a knee injury, which caused, unfortunately, the end of your career. What was the nature of the injury? And quite frankly, do you think if that happened today that you could recover from surgery and still play?
Well, I tore my anterior cruciate ligament and some other things in the knee, and I'll never forget as after getting up and getting to the locker room, um, the doctor said to me, he said, "Hey, you're finished," and I said, "Finished what, for the season?" Or no, 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 no. Your career is over, because at that time they didn't have a procedure to correct an ACL tear. And today you're out maybe 6 months, maybe, and you're back playing basketball and ready to go. And so but in a way, it was the latter part of my career, and in a way, it was kind of a blessing. How could it be a blessing in your career? Well, many times, as a professional at the latter part of your career, you try to hang on. You just, what am I going to do if I don't play basketball? And it was kind of like, that's closure. Now I got to get out there in the world and find a way to support a family and find something that I would enjoy doing.
So you leave the game. The 76ers, coached by Gene Shue, 1977, up 2-0 in the finals against Portland. The Blazers come back, win the series. Next year, they start 2-4, and out of nowhere, a guy without coaching experience, namely you, is anointed by the team to coach. What was that like coming in with no experience? And you had only one assistant, although an able assistant, a guy who was a college of basketball knowledge, in Jack McMahon. What was that like for you?
Um, what happened was I went down to a game because Johnny Kerr and Al Bianchi, who I had my rookie year with, I was in training camp with them, were coaching the Chicago Bulls. So I wanted to go down and say hello, see how they were doing. And at that time, I was doing some work with CBS. So the game's over, and I go to call my wife and just tell her I'm going to go have a beer with Al and Johnny. And she said, "What, Pat Williams called you." I said, "What did he call for?" And I said, "Well, he wanted you to call him immediately." So she gave me the number, And I called them, and he informed me that they were going to make a change. Fitz Dixon, who was the owner of the team, wanted to make a change, and he wanted you to be the coach of the team. And it was like, what? I've never coached a CYO basketball game. I've never done any of this. I said to Pat, he said, well, you got a day or two to think about it. So I went home, spent time with the wife. We discussed it. And I realized I still missed a lot of the game itself, besides announcing. And I decided to take it, but I knew the one thing I didn't have was any experience. I understood what goes through a player's mind. I knew a lot of the players on the team because I had played with them previously. And so I had met this guy and spent around 20 minutes with him. And there was something about him that I knew, you know, my gut told me he'd be good support for me and help me early in my basketball career. And that was Chuck Daly. So I had two men with more than 50 years of experience in the game of basketball who would help direct me, guide me, help me with practices, game situations, lineups, etc. And I was blessed to have those two men uh, the first year and a half or so of my coaching career to get my feet planted on the ground and understood who I was as a coach and what I needed in regards to players uh, to have any success in coaching.
Well, you had overwhelming success. You won nearly 70% of your games, and uh, unfortunately, there were a couple of disappointments. I hate to bring them up, but there were a couple of times where there were some blown leads in playoff series where the Sixers were up 3-1 and ended up losing, most notably to the Boston Celtics. Same situation presented itself in 1982. Sixers are up 3-1. Celtics come up and tie the series at 3. Game 7 at Boston. And I mean, no one, fans, press, whoever, gave the Sixers even this much of a chance of winning that game. They went on and they won. Andrew Toney had a remarkable game at 34 points. And you had one of the shortest news conferences after that game in NBA history. Let's listen.
Cunningham acknowledges the Garden chant, which raised this rivalry to an extraordinary level.
That truly showed me a great deal of class. And as competitive as the two teams are, it surely made us feel good, and that's what it's all about, the competition. The only thing I'm going to say is I'm just ecstatic for the 12 guys in there because we stuck together, because everyone else had buried us, and I'm just proud of them, period. Goodbye.
Billy, why only 30 seconds or so with the assembled media?
Well, the day before we had practice at the Palestra, as a matter of fact. And just as you said, our heritage was being questioned, especially after losing up 3-1 to the Celtics 2 years previous, and here we are again, and we're gonna fall on our face again. And I said to the players, I'll never forget. I said, my dream is we just go up there, win the game, and I just tell the sports writers and everyone else that doubted us, goodbye. We'll just make it the shortest press conference ever because that's all they deserved. Fast forward, we just had a spectacular game as a team. It was hard to believe. You would think that there was any pressure on our team the way they performed in that game. That might have been as rewarding a win as winning a championship, with everything being said and done about concerning that ball club. And I remember I went in, did that, and I came back, and opening the door to the locker room, there was Bobby Jones. And he said, "Did you do it?" I said, "I sure did." And he gave me a hug. He was so happy that I did that. And if anybody that knows Bobby Jones, he was just truly a special young man, and he still is, but just a great guy and such an important part to that ball club. So that was, and then coming back to Philadelphia, uh, we didn't realize the way the fans had responded. And it was so bad, the crowds at the airport, they had a bus that they put us on. And I'll never forget my two daughters, who were little, that people were shaking the bus. And I'll never forget them crying, afraid that people were going to turn the bus over. But the fans were so excited about what we had just achieved. And it was a great time, great game. And I was just fortunate to coach some great players as well as great people.
And they did some great things. Unfortunately, in 1980 and 82, losing in the finals to the Lakers. So losing in the finals three times in what, about a 5 or 6 year period, I think was enough. And Harold Katz made a deal for the then reigning most valuable player in the late great Moses Malone. How is it that Moses was integrated into a team that was already great so seamlessly?
Um, it was, we were still, even though we had gotten Moses, there was still that question mark. And it was a very close group of men. And we had traded Darryl Dawkins before that to New Jersey. So we needed a center. We knew we needed a physical presence to compete against the Lakers and the Celtics as well. And I'll never forget telling Harold, we need to get a center. And he went into his pocketbook and, got Moses. And I'll never forget talking to Moses that night when he was signing, is that explaining what we expected from him. And the great thing was, though, his hero was Julius Erving. And it was very important for him personally to help Julius to win a world championship because he knew how important that was to Doc. And so getting to training camp, players were still a little skeptical. They ended up losing Colwell Jones, Steve Mix was gone, and Darryl Dawkins. And, who are we? What are you doing? We came so close. It was one player or two plays and we could have won it. And after two practices, everybody knew that this was the right move. And Harold Katz did the great thing of going into his pocket and signing the most expensive basketball player at that time.
And a remarkable team. I just remember en route to winning 65 games and losing only one game in the playoffs that this was a team that just seemed to have missionary zeal, that they were not going to be denied no matter what. What do you remember most about that team?
Well, I remember a couple things that we won. We went to the West Coast trip and won all 5 games. That was unheard of, beating everybody on the West Coast. Other things I remember, I just remember Moses, his relentless pounding of the offensive boards. And the reason I bring that up is we're playing the Knickerbockers. It's a Sunday afternoon game. We're up, 15, 20 points, a couple minutes to play. I take Moses out of the game, but I knew something was wrong. He didn't have an offensive rebound. And I said, "What's wrong, Mo?" And he said, "My knee." So the doctors looked at it, and we had to sit him the remainder of the season. And matter of fact, and in those days, if you won your division, you got a week off before starting the playoffs. Moses wasn't practicing. We were still up in the air. Was he going to be able to participate? And obviously, and the other thing I remember was during this period of time, the team is out warming up. Moses is in the locker room, myself and Al Domenico, the trainer. And, I'm asking Mo how he's feeling. And he was explaining to me, "Don't worry." He said, 4-4-4. I said, "What?" He said, "We're going to win, all our playoff games." And I said, "From your mouth to God's ears." And look how close we came. Losing one game in Milwaukee, it was on a Sunday because we won on Saturday, and then we had to come back and play the next day at 12 o'clock. And it was a tight game with 2 minutes to play. It was anybody's ball game. So he almost came to. The other thing I remember, as a coach, you're never comfortable. And I think that's, for me, it was a positive. having that type of attitude, because we had just beaten the Lakers in Game 3, and I was back in my room within an hour watching film. And Harold Katz says, "Come on, we're going to go out and celebrate." I said, "What?" And I said, "Anything that can go wrong can go wrong, and I'm not going anywhere." Fast forward, we go to practice the next day, and Domenico comes over to me and said, "We got a problem." I said, "Oh, here we go." And Moses got hit in the back or something, and he was having a tough time breathing. I said, "Oh." And Moses comes over to me and said, "Don't worry, Kareem doesn't want to see any more of me." And I said, "I hope you're right, big guy." And he went out and put on a show in that second half. I forget how many rebounds he had, but he just completely dominated that point on. And it was a strange team. If I'm not mistaken, we were down every game at halftime we played. And it was one of
You're
those,
talking about the finals.
we were always, and it was just like all of a sudden, my great speech at halftime stimulated them to the point that they went out and won every game. So I wish I could say that was true, but that's the way we responded in the second half.
Well, I hate to bring it up, but the following season as defending champions, 83-84, you lose in the first round. It was a best of 5 against the then New Jersey Nets. Weird series in that the road team won every game. You got a game 5 on your own home floor, and you ended up losing. And I remember after that season, we did an interview with you, and you said this team was like the child that you tell them, don't touch the stove because it's hot, and they touch the stove anyway. And I think the metaphor was in regards to the fact that you thought that team felt it could turn it on whenever it wanted, and unfortunately it was unable to.
Yeah, it was a terrible thing that occurred during the regular season early, that we would be down in the fourth period, and then we would turn it on and win. And you kept saying, "Listen, guys, this isn't going to work all the time. We better make sure that we get our acts together." But that game, I still remember, we were up, I'm going to say, 4 minutes to play, 5 minutes to play, 7 points, somewhere in that area. And whatever we did as coaches, as players, there was nothing there. It was almost like we just ran out of gas, and there was nothing I could think of. Maybe somebody else in that position could have thought of something, but we just couldn't do anything right, and they did everything perfect.
There was a player on that team whose career unfortunately was cut short because of a foot injury, Andrew Toney, and I'm just trying to educate some of the younger viewers and listeners. Andrew was 6'3", he was about 210, he was solidly built, he had a great first step. I remember you always used to run the first play of the game for him, that baseline screen where he hit the shot from the corner. And unfortunately, his career came to a premature end because he had a stress fracture. And if I'm not mistaken, then the diagnostics weren't available to properly say that he still had an injury, because the doctors then were saying, hey, he's fine to play as far as we can see, but he still had pain, and it ended up disintegrating into a mess. What do you remember from that? And do you think Andrew Toney would be a Hall of Famer had he had a complete career?
No question about the Hall of Fame. No question. And it's a shame the fans in Philadelphia didn't get a chance to see, after Dr. J and Moses is gone, Maurice Cheeks and Andrew Toney taking over the team, because they complemented each other. They were best friends. And the terrible thing about Andrew is he retires. He goes down to Atlanta working in the education department. He goes to the YMCA trying to play basketball. He couldn't do it then. I remember him telling me, I tried. I still can't. The only thing I can do is go play golf. Cannot run or cannot do anything putting pressure on my feet. So it was a great loss to Philadelphia, to basketball. And if he played today, the range that you watch Seth Curry shoot the basketball, that's Andrew Toney. I'm not exaggerating. I remember one time there was a guy named Kevin Lockery, who was doing announcing for, I think it was CBS, were in LA. And he said, what kind of range does Andrew have? And for some reason, he was standing near half court. I said, Andrew, shoot a jumper from there. And of course, it goes in. And he didn't throw it, he shot it. He had unlimited range. Um, he sacrificed so much. Games like you had mentioned in the Boston Garden, scoring 34, that could have been a regular basis. But he understood he was playing with Dr. J and Moses Malone. So there had to be a balance, and people had to sacrifice. And he sacrificed as much or more than everyone.
So, meantime, in 1984, there is a kid from Auburn named Charles Barkley. And the Sixers drafted him at number 5. First of all, that wasn't a surefire thing. I mean, he was infamous for eating a pizza or two at one sit. He was 6'5", maybe. He was a power player at 6'5", and yet he did all these dramatic things and really was just a tremendous college player. Take me inside the Sixers front office and the debate that surrounded Charles Barkley before the team finally selected him.
Well, it was a debate. Harold Katz was in love with Charles. I wasn't sure. And there was another player, Sam Perkins, out of North Carolina, who was very intriguing and went on and had, I think, played same amount of years, 16 or 17 years in the NBA. But the beauty of Sam was he could play two spots. He could be the backup to Moses, and he also could be a power forward with a great range and had the ability to shoot the three. So there was a little bit of concern, debate. Who's going to have the better career? And it worked out where Charles just fell in our lap because Sam went one player before that, so there was never a debate. And Charles was not an easy person to coach his first year, and it was a lot of time I had to spend dealing with Charles because Charles liked to do things his way. And now I look at Charles and what he's been able to achieve and what he achieved um, as a player, as an announcer, as a human being, and now he's a grandfather. Oh my gosh, um, he's just wonderful. I mean, and to see Charles and how he deals with his stardom and dealing with people and kids and signing autographs, spending time. He is just a wonderful gentleman and wonderful man.
Give me an example of some of the issues you may have experienced with him as a rookie.
Charles didn't like to run back on defense. Matter of fact, walking would have been a move. So there were times when he would have to run a little bit more than others because of his lack of cooperation. And the shame was I couldn't really get to him at that point in his career. And one of the reasons I thought about coaching a little longer was I saw what a great player Charles Barkley was going to become and the gifts that he had. Uh, he was just unusual. I mean, we've never seen anyone with his physical, his athleticism, his strength, his basketball IQ. He went on, and as we've seen, he came close to winning a world championship and was MVP in the league. So that tells you what his abilities were.
And so at the end of his rookie year, 1985, you still had that 83 team pretty much intact. Yes, they were getting older, but they were still very, very good. And you decided to retire from coaching. Why?
Um, there were several reasons. Number one, it was totally consuming job to me. And I had two daughters, and they were about that age, 13 years old. And probably a wrong assumption, but I always worried that, they're going to be 21 years old, and where was I? And also, as I said, it was a demanding job to me. And the travel all of those things. When I took my legal pad and put the pluses and minuses, and I loved my job as a coach. And so many people thought I'd be back the next year, back in coaching. And if I collected all the dinners that I bet that I wouldn't, I'd still be eating free dinners. But it was the right thing for Bill Cunningham and his family, and I think for basketball, that it was. I don't know how much more I would have been able to give to the team, and probably, just thinking about it, Mark, I coached those guys long enough. I would think that they were probably getting tired of listening to the same speech. Oh, here comes speech 822. Oh my gosh, is he doing it again? And I was through that as a player, listening to coaches. But here I was. That's what I always marveled me about Julius Erving, that he could tolerate my halftime, pregame, postgame talks that he had to deal with for 8 years.
Last question for you. You're a Philadelphia 76er. You played briefly for the ABA, of course, but through and through, you are a Sixer. You're the only man ever to win a title with a franchise as both a player and a coach. What did it mean for you to play in Philadelphia, to be in touch with the fans, and to represent the red, white, and blue the way you did?
It was an honor. It truly was an honor. I experienced, I guess, the best of Philadelphia basketball, playing with Wilt Chamberlain, winning a championship, and then coaching Julius Erving and Moses Malone, plus others. I'm not trying to forget about Clem Johnson or Reggie Johnson or Mark Ivoroni, but they happen to have been the stars. And no one has experienced what I've experienced with Philadelphia basketball. And so I have wonderful memories, wonderful dreams of the people, the players, the response of the city, having 2 million people at a parade in 82, 83. Just, I can't imagine anyone having a better ride than I did, I guess, for about 18 years with Philadelphia.
Billy Cunningham, I have to say that as Sixer fans, we're grateful that you have passed our way, and we're so thankful for all of your contributions. I am very grateful for the fact that you spent the last 45 minutes with me. Thank you, my friend. I greatly appreciate it.
My time, anytime, Mark. It's a shame you retired too.